The time is 5 minutes past midnight, local time, April 26, 1986. And Chernobyl Reactor 4 is preparing to undergo a scheduled shutdown for maintenance. Close by, the Atomgrad of Pripyat is largely quiet, as many of its residents have gone to bed. Due to the large number of employees who live in the city, many of them are aware of the upcoming shutdown at the nuclear power plant, and so pay no attention to what is ongoing at the site. Inside the control room, preparations are already underway for the turbine rundown program, after which the reactor itself will be shut down. As a result of this, the control room is quite busy at the moment, with plenty of operators and observers excited to see the rundown. And this was not the only place where experiments were taking place. Inside of the turbine hall is a red Mercedes-Benz that has been brought to the nuclear power plant to measure turbine vibrations. Already, the operators were facing challenges. The program they were following called for a reactor power of between 700 and 1000 megawatts thermal during the preparation for the rundown. But this would mean producing a large amount of steam that would have nowhere to go once the test started. Steam could build up and cause a wave of pressure through the steam separators, something which any senior block control engineer, such as Boris Stolyachuk, would want to avoid. There was also the issue of the turbine, which still needed to be disconnected for vibration experiments. This could only be disconnected at low levels. They had 3 options to choose from. The first was to continue at 700 megawatts and risk overpressurizing the steam separators, an option many operators had misgivings about. They could have aborted the test, but that would be foolish with all the equipment set up and the contractors waiting. The third option was to adjust the test program and conduct the test at 200 megawatts. This was allowed in the regulations, which didn't forbid the continual running of the reactor at that power, and even explicitly mentioned it. Additionally, one of the steps in the program near the end specified the power to the turbine had to be lowered to the level of self-sufficiency, which was roughly 200 megawatts. When Akimov went to sit down to read the turbine rundown program, Razim Davletbayev witnessed Dyatlov beginning to reproach Akimov for taking too long for not paying attention to the complexity of the situation, and then shooed Akimov out of his chair and started to rush him along. What Davletbayev witnessed is the sum total of all witness testimony relating to any aggressive behaviour from Dyatlov that night. Dyatlov leaves the control room to inspect areas of Unit 4 that will need maintenance following the shutdown, as potential defects manifested more frequently during changes in operating mode, such as a reduction in power. Several observers continue to watch Leonid Toptonov as he reduces the power. Yovchenko and Perevoschenko arrive in room 523-1 to drink tea with Agilov and other workers there. Perevoschenko tells Agilov that Unit 4 was to be shut down that night, but a test was to be carried out beforehand. This didn't concern Agilov. It was the job of Hodemchuk and others who were operating the pumps on that side of the building to carry out the necessary procedures for the rundown to occur. In the central control room between Units 1 and 2, Boris Rogozhin, the chief shift supervisor, is on shift. Rogozhin is engaged in near constant phone calls with Unit 4, particularly concerned about when the rundown experiment will occur and when the turbine will be disconnected from the reactor for vibration experiments. Rogozhin, however, has very limited information at his disposal about the parameters of reactors 3 and 4. That is because he is located in the central control room that oversees Units 1 and 2. Reactors 1, 2 and 3 continue to operate at full power. Aside from the shutdown at Unit 4, the night was like any other night. Akimov and Tregub begin to look through the test program once more to clarify details. Akimov himself was walking from desk to desk, asking for the status of equipment from Toptanov, Stolyachuk and Kirschenbaum. Tregub had moved over to Kirschenbaum's desk, watching as the operator prepared to idle the 8th turbine in preparation for the vibration experiment. When idling, the turbine would accept minimal steam from the reactor, something that Kirschenbaum was already experienced in doing, having done the same for the 7th turbine the day before. Toptanov, still being watched by Proskuryakov, Kudryav, Stev, Elshin and others, began the process to transfer the reactor from local automatic control, where each of the 6 areas of the reactor were controlled separately, to global automatic control, where all of the reactor was controlled simultaneously. The procedure to change from different control modes was complex. Each step had to be followed in an exact order. preparation to disconnect the turbine from the reactor, the reactor power is now well below the 700 megawatt limit specified in the program. However, because the 700 megawatts was simply arbitrary, this has no significant impact on the experiment. All parameters throughout the reactor currently remain stable. There is no warning that in less than an hour, the reactor will no longer exist. Is watching from the turbine port when the SRV alarm sounded. The SRV alarm indicates a reduction in the flow of water flowing through the reactor. Something quite significant and requiring immediate action. Toptonov, however, was distracted by the transition from the local automatic power regulator to the global automatic regulator. Tregup walked over to the pult to assist, picking up the phone to call an electrician to verify the signal. If it was verified, they would then need to send operators to open the regulator valve. While Tregup managed this, and others looked on, the situation began to change. During the transition from the local automatic power regulator, some fault occurred. The causes for this have never been fully ascertained, but we know that when the automatic regulator 1 came online, it fully withdrew to the upper limit. This prevented automatic regulator 2 from coming online, effectively jamming the automatic control rods. From there, something caused the power to drop. If xenon played a role, it was likely minimal, as the core was not significantly poisoned at this point. One possibility is the manifestation of self-propelled rods, in which a group of automatic control rods spontaneously inserted, causing the drop in power. Another possibility could be as simple as the positive power coefficient, or that the power would self-destabilize. Where an increase in power results in a further increase, the same is true if the power decreases. Regardless of the cause, the power is falling, and the operators have no way to stop it. reactor power stabilizers at 30 megawatts. Toptanov and Akimov pause for several minutes, trying to decide what to do. Davletbaev sees Kirschenbaum put TG8 in a mode close to idle, producing 3 to 5 megawatts. Davletbaev walks over to Kirschenbaum and tells him that, if there is a decrease in the pressure of the separator drums, unload turbo generator 8, but don't disengage the motor mode of the generator. And if there is a further decrease despite this, turn off TG8. Leonid Toptanov begins to raise the power, assisted by Yuri Tregub. Tregub notes that Toptanov is pulling more so from the third and fourth quadrants, and asks him why he is pulling the rods unevenly. Tregub begins to help Toptanov with the raising of the power, pointing out rods that Toptanov was able to pull. Toptanov either agrees with Tregub or, in some cases, disagrees and opts to raise the control rods in a different manner to how Tregub suggests. The signal for emergency fluctuations of water level in the steam separator drums is switched on. Dyatlov returns to the control room of Unit 4. He sees Toptanov, Akimov, Proskyryakov and Kudryavtsev gathered around the reactor panel. Akimov reports that when switching from local automatic control to global automatic control, the power had dropped to 30 megawatts, and they were trying to raise it. This did not concern Dyatlov, who allowed them to continue raising the power. The EPS trip point in response to a drop in the steam separator pressure is changed from 55 kilograms per square centimeter to 50 kilograms per square centimeter. Davletbayev tells Dyatlov that if the steam to TG8 decreases any further, they will have to shut off TG8. Dyatlov nods to Tregub, Akimov, Toptonov, Kudryavtsev and Proskuryakov, who are gathered around the reactor pult, raising the power, and says power will be restored. Dyatlov and Metlenko are speaking to each other about the test when Akimov approaches them. He asks Dyatlov for permission to raise the power to 200 megawatts instead of 700 megawatts. Dyatlov approves this, as it will have no impact on the test. The DREG system that records reactor parameters is disabled due to preparation of the magnetic tape for the DREG system in preparation for the rundown test. Turbo generator number 8 is disconnected from the reactor to allow for more vibration experiments using the Mercedes. The 2-turbine trip signal is therefore disabled as a result, as disconnecting the turbine without it would in fact scram the reactor. drag regains function. The one overcompensation upward signal is switched off. A signal for malfunction of the measuring part of AR2 is switched on. An emergency fluctuations of water level in the steam separator drum signal is also switched on. The signal for malfunction of the measuring part of AR2 is switched off. a 1 overcompensation downward signal is switched on. Inside of the central control room between Units 1 and 2, Boris Rogoshkin keeps up on details about the turbine rundown. The 1 overcompensation downward signal is switched off. The dreg system fails to function.
At this point, we should discuss what the Turbine Rundown Program actually is. The Turbine Rundown Program, which can be traced back to the chief design engineer overseeing the RBMK project, Nikolai Dolezal. In a letter from 1976, he proposed that they use the inertia of the turbine to continue to power the main circulating pumps and the feedwater pumps that supplied the reactor, to cover the space of time between the loss of power and the backup diesel generators reaching maximum output. A seemingly genius idea, and and even other government bodies assisting in the design and construction, such as Hydro project, approved of it. It was quite obvious, however, for a plethora of reasons, that the idea of using the turbine rundown to power the main circulating pumps was infeasible at the time, despite the universal approval. The entire plan for the rundown was for it to occur automatically when a maximum design basis accident, the rupture of a large diameter coolant pipe, occurred, at the same time as a loss of power. However, a series of incredibly complex remote circuit switches would have been necessary, some of which would have disabled safety systems around both the turbine and the entire building, which was simply impossible with the current design. The new turbine models were upgraded to allow for the power from a rundown to be used, and the concept of the turbine rundown was accepted into the technical safety reports for all RBMK reactors built in 1979 and beyond, without ever being experimentally proven to be possible, let alone feasible, in a design basis accident situation. Eventually in 1982, the organization responsible for the electrical circuitry of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Dontekenergo, and the designers of Chernobyl Units 3 and 4, the Hydro project, collaborated to attempt to demonstrate the capability of the turbine rundown at Chernobyl Unit 3. The procedure was simple: lower the power of the reactor down to a suitable level and disconnect one of the two turbines. The connected turbine would then be connected to an oscilloscope to measure the outputted voltage during the rundown, and the voltage of the main circulating pumps and feed water pumps connected. All the necessary equipment was transferred to other systems, and then the specially added design basis accident button was pressed, which created a signal simulating a design basis accident. The turbine would run down, supplying power to the pumps, while the diesel generator would start up and eventually take over. The measurements were taken from that, and they could determine if the rundown program had been a success. Unfortunately for all their planning, the results were a resounding failure. The turbine was unable to supply power to the pumps for long enough, and therefore the rundown could not be a trusted method to stabilize the reactor during the hypothesized emergency. The electrical engineers from Dontekenergo concluded the generator of the turbine needed greater regulation, made the necessary changes, but had to wait until another shutdown to attempt the rundown again. Chernobyl Reactor 4 was launched, and still, one of the safety features that the designers and builders had placed so much hope on had never been demonstrated. Not dissuaded by failure, Dontekenergo began to branch out to other RBMK power plants in hopes of securing the same contracts to run the turbine rundown program at their reactors. Among them was the Leningrad nuclear power plant, the oldest. Unfortunately for the company, the director of the site, Anatoly Eperin, refused. The only group wishing to proceed with the turbine rundown was the sole plant with any investment, Chernobyl. In 1984, Dontekenergo was again dispatched to Chernobyl to repeat the experiment. This time the rundown did not even occur, as the signals from the turbine were not recorded. The reactor was shut down, and they missed their opportunity to gather any data. The electricians left empty-handed of results. As Dontekenergo had been dispatched to the Armenian nuclear power plant in 1985, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant had been left to conduct the rundown unassisted. Again, they set up the oscilloscopes to record the voltage, but this time they accidentally connected them to an electrical circuit that lost power during the rundown. Everything proceeded normally, and may have been a success, but they had no way to confirm it yet again. Another year passed, and the date of the scheduled Reactor 4 shutdown on April 25 approached. This time, they were determined to prove the possibility of the rundown. Dontekenergo had returned from Armenia and were ready to make the journey back to Chernobyl, and workers such as the chief engineer Anatoly Dyatlov, who had assisted in the previous rundowns that hadn't been recorded, were also returning to supervise. An almost identical turbine rundown program was prepared, with alterations for new safety systems, and the final plan was submitted by Dyatlov to Nikolai Fomin, his superior. Fomin, as he had numerous times before, approved the program and allowed them to continue.
the drag system regains function. A signal for malfunction of the measuring part of AR2 is switched on. The emergency fluctuations of water level in the steam separator drum signal is also still switched on. The water in the steam separator drums is 505mm below the centre mark on the left and 168mm below the centre mark on the right. However, they are supposed to be close to the centre mark. Dyatlov asks Toptonov about the current operating reactivity margin. Toptonov responds that it is roughly equivalent to 19 or 18 manual control rods inserted into the core. Stolyarchuk gradually begins increasing the feed water flow rate on the left side of the reactor. The feed water supply to the right steam separator is increased from 124 tons per hour to 424 tons per hour to increase the level of water in the steam separator drums. Main circulation pump number 12 is activated. Immediately, a phone call mentions that the 12th main circulation pump is gaining something bad. Dyatlov calls room 412 and asks for Perevoschenko to go to the control room to watch the experiment. Feed water flow rate on the right side is equal to 200 tons per hour. Stolyachuk begins increasing the flow rate on this side as well. Feed water flow rate on the left side has increased to 600 tons per hour. Stolyachuk now greatly increases the feed water flow on both sides to restore the water level in the steam separated drums. It dramatically increases to 1,232 tons per hour on the left side and peaking at 1,152 tons per hour on the right side. Feed water flow rate on the left side peaks at 1,392 tons per hour. The right side feed water flow rate has dropped to 936 tons per hour. Main circulation pump number 22, the 8th main circulating pump, is also activated. The significant increase in cold feed water reduces the production of steam and therefore reactivity, necessitating the withdrawal of more control rods to increase the reactivity. The total reduction in the operating reactivity margin is estimated to be equal to 2.5 control rods removed from the core. The operating reactivity margin temporarily drops below 15, albeit Toptonov is not aware. Feed water flow rate on the left side has dropped to 1,000 tons per hour. Feed water flow rate on the right side has dropped to 400 tons per hour and continues to decrease. As a result of the increased feed water flow rate, the amount of water present in the steam separator drum has increased to 9 millimeters above the center mark on the right side. The water present in the left steam drum remains 594 millimeters below the center mark. Feed water flow rate on the left side has dropped significantly to 592 tons per hour. The sudden reduction in the flow rate of the feed water into the reactor increases the temperature at the inlet valves. The temperature of the left side MCP inlet is 280.2 degrees Celsius and 282.2 degrees Celsius on the right side MCP inlet. The temperature will remain stable after this point. Feed water flow rate on the left side has dropped to its lowest point, at 104 tons per hour. The amount of water present in the steam separator drum on the right peaks at 126 millimeters above the center mark. It begins dropping again, accompanied with emergency fluctuations of water levels in the steam separator drums. Akimov, clutching the test program in hand, walks from desk to desk, asking Stolyachuk and Toptonov about the status of their equipment and assisting Stolyachuk in managing the water levels in the steam separator drums. The amount of water present in the steam separator drums on the left peaks at 400mm below the center mark, and begins dropping again. Yet again, Dreg fails to function, due to reloading of the tape to fix parameters for the rundown experiment. Turbo generator number 8 is reconnected to the system. Valery Perevoschenko arrives in the control room. The Dreg program regains function as the tape is reloaded. Almost immediately, there are emergency fluctuations of water level in the steam separator drums. To continue restoring the level of water in the steam separator drums, Stolyachuk again begins to increase the feed water flow rate. Feed water flow rate is equal to 192 tons per hour on the left side and 112 tons per hour on the right side. The sudden increase in cold feed water causes a sudden reduction in steam production in the core, and therefore lowers the reactivity. More control rods, including those that insert from the bottom of the reactor, are withdrawn to raise reactivity. A 1 overcompensation upward signal is switched on. Automatic rods are being withdrawn in order to prevent a reduction in power. Water flow rate on the left side peaks at approximately 832 tons per hour. It begins decreasing again. Feed water flow rate on the right side peaks at 720 tons per hour. It too begins decreasing again. The parameters recorded on magnetic tape, recorded at 122.30, indicate that the operating reactivity margin is equal to 7.5 manual control rods in the core. However, this is likely capturing data from about 1:21 AM. Since then, the sudden reduction in feed water flow rate has allowed boiling in the reactor to resume, and control rods inserting to compensate. command oscilloscope engage is given by Metlenko through the phone. The emergency stop valves of turbo generator 8 are closed. The rundown of main circulation pumps 13, 14, 23 and 24 begins. More people enter the control room to observe the end of the rundown. Toptanov asks Akimov what he should do. Akimov tells Toptanov to push the AZ5 button, making a tapping motion with his finger. At 1:23:39, Leonid Toptanov presses AZ5. Upon seeing the rods have descended only halfway into the core, Dyatlov sends Kudryavtsev and Proskuryakov to the reactor hall to lower the rods by hand. He immediately realizes they wouldn't be able to do this, walks out into the corridor and calls for them, but they are gone. Unit 3 undergoes an emergency power reduction to between 60 and 70% of power as the explosions have degraded the vacuums around the turbines. A black rain begins to fall on the cooling pond, where many fishermen are fishing. Dyatlov, Davletbayev, and others that followed Brashnik to see turbines 7 and 8 reach a balcony overlooking them. The collapse of the ceiling had been extensive, falling largely atop the 7th turbine, the feed water pumps, and the electrical fittings that connected the 7th turbine to the electrical grid, and on top of the senior engineer's room between the 7th and 8th turbine. Numerous fires near the feed water pumps had also started. More smoke was emerging near the oil systems, used as lubrication around the 7th turbine, and from within the pile of debris. The sound of steam escaping was audible above them, but when they looked up, all they could see were stars in the night sky. The sight of this sent the workers running back to the control room, already preparing more orders to give to the operators who hadn't seen the sight they had, and what it could mean.
Оперативную машину на выезд.
Что там такое?
Танечка, иди сюда, быстрее, нас атомная горит. Ой, мать.
Perevoschenko returns to the Unit 4 control room, confirming to Akimov and Dyatlov that he could not access the valves connecting the emergency tanks of water to the emergency core cooling system. The entrance to the room had been blocked by debris. Yovchenko arrives outside of the Unit 3 control room with a stretcher, almost walking into Viktor Degtyarenko. Yovchenko doesn't recognize him, as his face is completely covered in blisters and burns. Inside the bowels of Unit 4, the pumps designed to pump out the automatic fire suppression system water are unable to keep up with the flow of water into the basement. The cable spreading rooms, which are occupied by 6 and 0.4 kilovolt main cable streams, begin to flood.
ТВПЧ-2?
Да, Взрыв на главном корпусе, между третьим и четвертым
А там люди есть?
Да,
И люди есть, да?
да.
И в результате взрыва что там горит?
Отметка 12. На отметке плюс 12, 7-я машина.
Сколько машин вы направили?
Все машины выехали.
Поднимай над состав.
Поднимаю, начальника поднял.
Так всех, весь офицерский состав, офицерский корпус поднимай.
Proskyakov and Kudryavtsev returned to the control room. The reactor hall was inaccessible by the route they took, as debris blocked off the stairs. The first firefighters begin to arrive, from the nuclear power plant's own fire service. 12 firefighters in total are arriving to fight the fire, led by Vladimir Pravik. Initially, they stopped outside of the second main administration building. Pravik, upon seeing the scale of the disaster, radios alarm signal number 3, summoning firefighters from across the Kiev region. He turns to another firefighter, Ivan Shavrin, and says, "Well, Mikhailovich, it's going to be hot for us. We'll really have to work here." The station shift supervisor, Boris Rogoshkin, sends an alarm call from his office to several relevant people, summoning them to the site to help mitigate the immediate effects of the disaster. It was received as a single, uninterrupted ring on the telephone that, when answered, would play a pre-recorded message. Dyatlov leaves the control room with the intention of looking at the reactor hall from plus 35.5, escorted by Gorbachenko. On the way out, he bumps into Simonenko, Semikopov, Gemrick and Kurguz. Kurguz is severely scalded from steam, with his skin hanging from his face and hands. He orders them to get Kurguz to a medical unit, and Simonenko tells him that the entire reactor building has been destroyed. Following this, Dyatlov decides to look at the reactor from outside instead. By crawling, Yuri Vashinin, Alexander Novik, and Andrei Brachamin are able to make it through the oil systems for the feedwater pumps, which were now flooded with hot water, and turn them off, preventing another fire from starting up. Vershinin and Novik will receive a lethal dosage of radiation doing this. The fire engines from the nuclear power plant's own fire service drive around to the back of the turbine hall in order to fight fires there. Several firefighters, such as Ivan Shavry and Alexander Petrovsky, will climb staircases and ladders to the roof of the turbine hall to attempt to smother the blazes using canvas sheets instead of water, out of fear of damaging equipment in the turbine hall below, and because the water supply to the roof had been lost in the explosion. Unable to escape the building, Semikopov smashes a window and jumps out of the building, alongside Gemrich, Kurguz, and Simonenko. They begin to walk around the north face of the plant. The emergency power reduction in Unit 3 continues. Dyatlov manages to make his way out of the building by walking through one of the transport corridors, which was already partially flooding with radioactive water and would give him a significant radiation dose. From there, he begins a slow walk around the exterior of the building, towards Unit 4, where he saw the extent of the destruction, and then back towards Unit 3. From there, he was able to conclude that the reactor was likely destroyed.
Час 35 минут. Леонид Алексеевич.
Да.
Алло, Припять, 3 и 4 блок горит крыша в результате аварии взрыва.
Ой, давай. Так уже подтвердили?
Не подтвердили, авария там произошла у них. Фотодиспетчер Припяти сказала, ВПЧ-2. Я, значит, высылаю, высылаю. Потом кого? Полецкая, пусть все едут.
Всех, поднимай Татьяна.
Firefighters from Pripyat arrive, bringing with them 3 more vehicles. Initially, these vehicles were parked at the south side of the turbine hall, as they often were in their training. However, this means that nobody is fighting the fires on the north side of the building. Due to the immense heat from the fire, some of the firefighters begin to remove their protective gear, including their helmets. All the while, they continue to try to stamp out the fire using canvas sheets. Down below, in the turbine hall, Vladimir Pravik arrives and asks about the status. One of the turbine workers responds with the measures being taken to extinguish the fires, and Pravik leaves. The Pripyat Fire Brigade begins to move around to the north face of the building to fight the fires there. The shift supervisor Rogoshkin sees debris around the corridor leading towards Unit 4, and instead decides to enter the control room of Unit 3. Bagdasarov reports to him the loss of the main circulation pumps of Unit 4, and Rogoshkin orders him to prepare thyroid protection. He then makes his way back to the central control room. When Bagdasarov opens the iodine pill reserves in control room 3, he discovers there are just 9 of them. He starts giving them out to everyone who enters the control room. The control room of Reactor 4 has ran out of petal respirators, and one of the observers of the experiment, Sergei Gazin, has to leave the control room to collect more, as none of the other operators can leave their posts. New signals appear from Unit 4, lowering the level in the emergency tank of the SUZ, and pressure increase in the steam separator room. A new series of signals appear in Unit 4. Pressure increase in the airtight boxes to the right of the emergency core cooling system, and pressure drop in the pressure head manifold of the CPS. The signal for the pressure increase repeatedly increases and decreases. At 140.39, the pressure in the right steam separator decreases from 40 to 22 atmospheres. This was recorded in the operating logs as being accompanied with some sort of explosion. The first ambulance has arrived at the nuclear power plant.
Алло, Иванков? Значит, вы выезжаете в Припять? Алло? Да, я слышу. На атомную станцию выезжайте. Там 3-4 блок горит крыша. Ага, сейчас все. Высылайте. Да, едет.
The paramedic in the ambulance, Sasha Skachok, calls the hospital and tells them that there is a fire. There are people with burns, and a doctor was needed urgently. One of these doctors, Valentin Belikon, leaves for the power plant, while the hospital dispatcher calls the head of the medical unit. 2 more ambulances join Belikon's, heading towards the nuclear power plant. Viktor Brakhanov is called by Yuri Semyonov, informing him about the accident. Brakhanov hangs up and then attempts to call Boris Rogozhkin, with no success. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Brakhanov quickly gets changed and prepares to make his way down to the nuclear power plant. Alexander Yevchenko and Yuri Tregub encounter Valery Perevozchenko, Viktor Proskuryakov and Alexander Kudryavtsev, who are going to plus 35.5 on the eastern side of the reactor building, in an attempt to access the reactor hall to lower the control rods. Despite Yevchenko's protests, stating the reactor is destroyed, Perevozchenko responds that they still have to try. As Yevchenko is the only one with a flashlight, he joins Perevozchenko, Proskuryakov and Kudryavtsev as Tregub returns to the control room to report the damage. Kurgus, the man who was scalded with steam during the explosion, enters an ambulance. His colleague, Oleg Gemrich, goes to follow, but is blocked, as he doesn't have his pass, which he left on +27 in his jacket. Gemrick tells the guard to write his name down, but the guard does not let him leave, and holds him at gunpoint. Gemrick relents and Kurgos leaves the site on the ambulance. Boris Rogoshkin returns to the central control room. He reports to the grid dispatcher about the severe fires, potential human casualties, and even the possible exposure of the core, before making his way back to Unit 3. Dyatlov sees Pravik walking around near the Pripyat Fire Brigade fire trucks by the Reactor 3 backup control room. He and Pravik talk with each other, and Dyatlov suggests driving up to the pipeline accumulator by the roof, with a fire hydrant nearby. Pravik agrees. The fire trucks begin moving closer to the reactor block. Major Leonid Telyatnikov arrives at the nuclear power plant. The fire brigade from the town of Chernobyl arrives. They join efforts to localize the fire on the reactor block. Yovchenko, Perevoschenko, Proskoyakov, and Kudryavstev reach a small ledge on plus 35.5 with a lift, the stairwell they ascended, and a door to the eastern side of the reactor hall. The door is lying ajar. Perevoschenko takes Yovchenko's flashlight, and he, Proskoyakov, and Kudryavstev enter through the door and around the corner. Yovchenko stays behind the door. Due to the accumulation of debris inside the room, They cannot see much, aside from some sort of strange glow. When they return back to Yevchenko, they tell him there is nothing they can do. They descend the stairwell away from the reactor hall. Boris Prushinsky, the chief engineer of Soyuz Atomenergo, is woken by a call about the accident at his home in Moscow. Viktor Brakhanov takes a shuttle bus down to the nuclear power plant. Meanwhile, Sergei Parashin, secretary of the party committee of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, is awoken by a phone call describing a serious accident. On his way out of his apartment, he flags down Vorobyov, the head of the station's civil defense headquarters, who had been woken up and was now driving down to the nuclear power plant.
Алло, Полесская? Да. Вы, значит, выезжаете на атомную станцию, там горит крыша третьего, четвертого блока.
Oleg Gemrik takes a shower to remove some of the radioactive contamination on his body. When he goes to a dosimetry room, the guard that stopped him leaving by gunpoint is now there in a rubber suit. Gemrik asks him where everyone is, and he replies saying everyone is outside. He looks out to see a large number of the employees are gathered in a little area watching the fire burn. And he can see Simonenko and Semikopov among them. Gemrik puts on a mask and also stands outside. Brakhanov sees the 4th unit from the shuttle bus as it drives past. He can see the central hall has been destroyed and the roof is missing. His first thoughts on seeing the matter was that he was going to prison. Anatoly Dyatlov arrives at the Unit 3 control room. He asks Bagdasarov if the accident was impacting his work. Bagdasarov tells him it was not, and they had inspected their part of the reactor block. Dyatlov is given some of their prophylactic iodine prep. He takes it and leaves. The dosimetrist Gorbachenko leads several people with a flashlight in an attempt to find Vladimir Shashanok. The group arrives at room 604 on plus 24 and can see the night sky and water flooding the corridor. Gorbachenko starts calling out for Shashanok when he hears gurgling behind him. He turns to see Shashanok, blood foaming at his mouth, lying on the ground with his arms dangling out of the building. Gorbachenko gives the flashlight to another member of the group, and then he and Pyotr Palamachuk pick up Shashanok and carry him on their backs to the Unit 4 control room. Electrical shop workers are working to prevent the ignition of 6 kV and 0.4 kV main cable streams and the 6 kV operating and reserve shielded bus wires. This prevents the risk of a fire starting up in these areas and subsequently spreading to Unit 3. Dyatlov makes his way back to the Unit 4 control room and passes Alexander Lelichenko. He brings him to the control room with him. Vladimir Pravik ascends to the roof of Unit 4 by climbing up Unit 3. Joined by Viktor Kibanok, Nikolai Vashchuk, Vasily Ignatenko, Nikolai Titanok, and Vladimir Tishor.
Алло, Василий Васильевич! Алло! Это диспетчер ВПО. Значит, Василий Васильевич, нас на атомной электростанции произошел взрыв объекта 3-4 блока.
Подумайте, машину здесь высунете, нет?
Да, оперативно выезжает, пизование заезжает.
Давайте, поднимайте личный состав, давайте город поднимайте, сообщите сразу, перезвоните сразу за мной.
Хорошо, понял.
Вот, поднимайте личный состав.
Хорошо.
Давай.
Major Leonid Telyatnikov takes command of the firefighters. He makes the decision to organise 2 combat areas. The first on the roof of the turbine hall to localise the fire there, and the second on the north side of the reactor to extinguish the fire and stop it spreading from Unit 4 to Unit 3 and causing a larger disaster. Viktor Burkanov arrives at his office. He calls the telephone operator to request that they summon the entire senior management to the nuclear power plant. He then tries to contact the Unit 4 control room, but receives no response. The head of Moscow Hospital No. 6's inpatient department, Dr. Angelina Guskova, is woken by a duty officer to attend the Ministry of Health. Davletbayev remotely calls Kirschenbaum and orders him to remotely disable the lubrication oil pump. He then warns Akimov that Korneev was displacing hydrogen from turbo generator number 8. Akimov replies that he understands and will inform the electricians. Lyubov Lelichenko, wife of Alexander Lelichenko, is woken by a neighbour who tells her about a major explosion in the turbine hall, and their husband had gone pale when they heard about it and had quickly left to deal with the accident. Telyatnikov is unable to find Rogozhkin. However, he looks inside the building and cannot see any fire. Despite this, he can see a glow coming from the reactor hall. Knowing there is nothing flammable in the reactor hall, he concludes it must be the reactor itself on fire. From the roof, Pravik reports an explosion in the reactor hall of Unit 4. Boris Prushinsky calls Georgy Kopchinsky, director of the Soviet Central Committee on Nuclear Energy. Prushinsky informs Kopchinsky that an explosion has occurred and Unit 4 is burning. Kopchinsky asks if the emergency assistance plan had been brought into action, and Prushinsky confirmed that it has. Gemrick vomits and is escorted by Simonenko to Belikon, the paramedic. Belikon, on the phone, sees the man complaining of symptoms matching the onset of acute radiation syndrome and orders him into one of the 3 ambulances now there. firefighters on the roof are having a hard time extinguishing even the smallest fires. Presumably, this was caused by superheated core elements vaporizing the water before it could even come into contact with the burning material. The explosion fractured fire hydrants, rendering them useless. A fire hose is being laid, as a result, on the roof of Unit 4. Palamarchuk brings a heavily wounded Shashanok to the Unit 4 control room and places him in a chair. Shashanok was unconscious and not reacting to the immense pain he would have been in. Akimov tells Paravoschenko that Hodemchuk and 2 reactor hall operators were missing, and they will need to search for them. Dyatlov pointed out a stretcher in the corridor, and Palamarchuk retrieved it for Shashanok. Yovchenko and Palamarchuk begin transporting Shashanok down the main corridor to Control Room 3. Two fire nozzles are aimed at the roof of Unit 3 to cool it, preventing a fire from starting up there as well. Telyantnikov makes his way to the Unit 4 control room in order to assess the situation there, by entering through the transport corridor. The first members of the Government Commission in Moscow begin to set off for Soyuz Atomenergo, where they will headquarter. Kabanov, an employee of the Kharkiv turbine plant, approaches Dyatlov with 2 of his colleagues. Dyatlov tells them to leave. When Kabanov tells Dyatlov he wants to go back to retrieve his valuable computer and the Mercedes from the turbine hall, Dyatlov raises his voice for the only time of the night, telling them, "Damn it, to hell with that machine, Get out of the unit now! Yovchenko and Palamachuk arrive at Control Room 3 with Shashnok. Unit 3 Senior Reactor Control Engineer gives Yovchenko his jacket to replace Yovchenko's torn one. Yovchenko informs Bagdasarov that the pump hall has been destroyed and that Hodomchuk was missing. Bagdasarov therefore assumes that the cause of the accident was some sort of pump rupture. Brukhanov returns to the main administration building. He then calls the chief dosimetrist and asks for the radiation situation. He is told that the only devices they have measured up to 3.6 Rontgens per hour, and in most areas of the power plant, the dosimeter's maxed out. Brukhanov calls Gennady Veretennikov, head of the All-Union Industrial Department for Nuclear Energy, Georgy Rivenko, the first-party secretary of the Kiev region, and Vitaly Sklerov, Ukrainian Minister of Power and Electrification, informing them of the accident. Bagdasarov contacts Kotov, shift supervisor at Unit 1, and demands an immediate organisation of hand barrows to facilitate the transport of injured workers, and to call all of the ambulances. Alexander Agilov meets with Alexander Yovchenko, and they begin to search for Hodomchuk. Rogozhin tells Bagdasarov that he couldn't get permission from the grid dispatcher, and therefore he couldn't shut down Unit 3. Leonid Telyatnikov arrives at Control Room 4. There, he finds that the water pressure supplying the fire trucks was weak, and Telyatnikov gives the command to swap to the dry tube system. He then makes his way back outside. A dosimetrist, Samoylenko, begins to measure radiation in the Reactor 4 control room, using a 3.6 Röntgen per hour device. In the left and middle of the control room, the reading was about 500 to 800 micro-Röntgens per second, and on the right side it was off the scale. They estimated it was about 5 Röntgens per hour. When they attempted to measure the path to the backup control room, the reading was off the scale. Davletbayev enters the control room and hears these reports. He estimates they could only work about 3 hours in these conditions before they reach their maximum limits of 10 rem. Rogozhin arrives at the Unit 4 control room and asks what happened. Dyatlov reports that they pushed the AZ5 button, and then the reactor exploded. Rogozhin directly asks Toptonov if he had done so, and he confirms it. Perevozchenko reports a strange glow in the reactor hall, but no fires. And when Rogozhin inspects the equipment, he finds a loss of water in the right steam separators. He leaves to report the general accident. Based upon the radiation levels determined by the dosimetrist, Dyatlov dismisses Toptonov and Kirschenbaum from the control room, as well as Metlenko's team and Kabanov's team, due to them not being able to help in the situation. Stolyachuk and Akimov remain. Akilov and Yovchenko make their way through Block V of the South MCP Hall and peer into the Unit 4 side. Through the opening, they can only see steam being blown upwards from underneath. Sergeant Alexander Petrovsky Ivan Shavry and another firefighter are ascending the building to the vent block under Telyatnikov's orders when, at plus 30, they pass Pravik and the other firefighters who are descending from the roof. Petrovsky orders the third firefighter to help Pravik and the group down, while he and Shavry continue to the roof alone. In spite of Rogozhkin's order not to shut down Reactor 3, Yuri Bagdasarov starts the procedure to shut down Unit 3 with emergency speed. This procedure begins with the use of AZ-3, which reduces the operating power of the reactor from 100% to 50% at 2% per second. An injured firefighter makes his way to the ambulances and Belikon. Belikon administers him injections of relanium, chloropromazine, and other drugs. Akimov sends Toptonov and Kirshenbaum to the Unit 3 control room, leaving just Akimov and Stolyachuk. Lelachenko guides Akimov on what loads to shut down and circuits to shut off in order to de-energize the maximum number of cables and circuits around the block. The AZ-3 signal in Unit 3 is now underway. Telyatnikov emerges from the transport corridor outside and sees Pravik approaching him alongside the other men who had joined him on the roof. They report the situation. Telyatnikov orders Pravik and his men to Belikon's ambulance, having spent 30 minutes on the roof. At this time, all fires on plus 4.3, plus 12.5, plus 27, and plus 31.5 have been extinguished, totaling an area of roughly 250 square meters of fire. Belikon begins to attend to Pravik, who at this point can barely stand. Again, Belikon administers Relanium, chloropromazine, and other drugs, purely to relieve their pain. Belikon asks for potassium iodide from hospital number 126. However, it is refused until the patients can be sent to the hospital. Razim Davletbayev returns to the turbine hall having changed his clothes. The shift supervisor of the turbine shop calls Davletbayev from the first stage and asks if he needs any assistance. Davletbayev declines. Bagdasarov orders all of Unit 3's blowing ventilation to be isolated to the unit, to prevent any radioactive contamination from Unit 4. Angelina Goskova arrives at the Ministry of Health and begins to communicate with the director of hospital number 126. Initially, she is told that the explosion is only a minor one, with no serious consequences. The fire service from police arrives. Only 3 firefighters are members of this group. They join efforts to localize the fire on the roof of the turbine hall. a firefighting headquarters is established. Captain of the Internal Service, Leonenko, is selected as Chief of Staff. Senior Lieutenant of the Internal Service, Berezhin, is appointed as Head of Logistics. Lieutenant of the Internal Service, Datsko, is responsible for coordinating the efforts of the firefighters with the civil defense in the ABK-1 bunker, and medical personnel arriving on site. Senior Lieutenant of the Internal Service, Sazonov, is tasked with establishing contact with the administrative workers of the power plant to gauge the status of the 3 other reactors. Despite Davletbayev declining help, a small group of turbine operators arrive at turbine number 7. Davletbayev again declines their help and sends them back. Petrov, an equipment manager at Yuzhatom Energomontaj, is arriving at Pripyat from the north. As he passes Yanov station, he can see the flames lighting up VT2. Instead of continuing home, he chooses to drive up towards the power plant to get a better look of the unfolding disaster. Vorobyov reports a reading of 150 millirontgen per hour outside of ABK-1, more than 10,000 times the normal reading. He rushes back to the bunker, but his report is dismissed, as Brukhanov wants more time to think. Petrovsky and Shavry continue to extinguish the fire around the base of VT2. As Dyatlov is walking to the Unit 3 control room, he passes Anatoly Sitnikov and Vladimir Chuganov. They are in full protection and tell Dyatlov that they have been sent by Brukhanov to inspect the damage. Dyatlov tells them there is nothing to look at, puts on a respirator, and continues on towards Unit 3. Agilov and Yevchenko make their way to room 406, where there is a stairwell descending to +9. When they make their way down, they find a calm spot, with no dust or sound. They make their way to the doors to room 305/2, the sub-reactor space. Davletbayev examines turbines 7 and 8. Not knowing the radiation levels were significant, he concludes that the smell of ozone is most likely due to short-circuiting caused by burning cables, and not radiation ionizing the air. Yevchenko and Agilov press their ears against the door. There are no suspicious noises. However, this conceals what is actually happening on the other side of the door. Dyatlov arrives again at the Unit 3 control room. Rogozhkin, the station shift manager, was present, and suggests that Dyatlov coordinate the operation with Bryukhanov. Dyatlov responds by ordering Unit 3 to be shut down while the situation was still normal. Davletbayev sees Buzygin, Perchuk and Korneev in the turbine hall, who confirm that hydrogen was being displaced from TG8. Davletbayev questioned whether to turn on the emergency roof fire extinguishing system with them. However, Perchuk tells him not to, as he had gone on the roof and could confirm there was no fire present. Yevchenko and Agilov now descend to +6. They make their way to room 211, where the regenerators for the gas in the cooldown circuit are present. The door is ajar, and they can see steam bursting from the flanges of the regenerator, and pressurized steam escaping through the ceiling. In 8 months, the elephant's foot will be discovered in this corridor. On Dyatlov's way back to the Unit 4 control room, he passes the Deputy Chief of the Safety Engineering Department, Krasnozhen, who was wearing clothes sized too large and his head wrapped by a towel, so only his eyes were visible. While they didn't discuss the level of radiation, Krasnozhen laughed at his own appearance. Dyatlov laughs to himself about it in his head, and throws up severely while doing so. Agilov and Yevchenko descend partially down the stairwell in room 211 to +3. Their flashlights are weakening. They can only see a short distance. Here it is silent, with no dust, nor the sound of the pumps for Unit 4, which should have been audible. They do not continue down any further, as they were concerned their flashlights would burn out, and they would become lost in the darkness. Petrov drives past the construction office and parks up roughly 100 meters from the 4th unit. Using only the light from the fires that were burning across the building, he was able to spot the destroyed steam drums glowing red, and understood that the central hall had been destroyed. He looks down to see the debris where the north pump hall had been, with the pumps emerging from above, and could see firefighters and their trucks, as well as an ambulance driving away from the scene. Dyatlov returns to the Unit 4 control room. Perevoschenko states that he can't find Gemrich, Kurguz, or Hodemchuk. Dyatlov tells him that Gemrich and Kurguz are accounted for. Seeing someone stand on +70 at the base of the vent stack, Petrov becomes uncomfortable with the situation. Smelling ozone, Petrov turns around and starts driving back to his home in Pripyat. The fire over the turbine hall is now successfully extinguished, preventing the complete collapse of the roof. Dyatlov, Perevoschenko, and a dosimetrist moved to the North Pump Hall to search for Hodomchuk. Davletbayev arrived at the Unit 3 control room. He asked Bagdasarov for an update, who explained there was a high radiation level and there were aerosols. A respirator was required to continue working. Having assessed the condition on the lower floors of Unit 4, Akilov and Yevchenko made their way to the Unit 3 transport corridor. They lead through the large doors to approach Unit 4 at ground level. Despite several attempts, no contact can be established between the Soyuz Atomenergo headquarters in Moscow, where the government commission is forming, and the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Efforts to start coordination with Soyuz Atomenergo and other departments such as Minsredmash, the Ministry of Health, the Hydrometeorology National Committee, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, and others in response to the accident begins. Vorobyov drives around the exterior of the power plant, with his DP5 radiometer going off the scale. He will return to the bunker and tell Brukhanov that it is essential to warn the population of Pripyat. However, still, Brukhanov stalls. Agilov and Yevchenko back away from Unit 4. As Agilov looks upwards, he glanced at the central hall. The outer wall is sagging downwards in a curved shape, and coming out was a uniform glow, not like a fire. A thought crosses Agilov's mind. Can everything really be destroyed? They make their way inside, and part ways. Reactor 3 is now in a position ready to be shut down. At 2:56 AM, the order is given to shut down Reactor 3 using the AZ5 button.
tumbling down in the city that we love. Great clouds roll over the hills, bringing darkness from above. But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like you've been here before? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this if you close your eyes? Oh, 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 an optimist about this? How am I gonna be an optimist about this? Oh, oh.